as regards to the educational equity, I think that we should equalize, if only to get rid of that phrase. and I seriously think that there's something to be said for getting that issue off the table, because it is a total red herring. But it's going to be, as long as you don't have equalized spending in the schools, that is going to be blamed as one of the reasons for the other things. And so you want to get rid of it. It's a little like Adam Smith, you see, who argued that that labor unions should be allowed to exist, which they weren't in England in his time, not because they would do a lot for the poor, but because as long as you forbade them, people would say, if only we had labor unions, you see, we would have our problem solved. I know that there's these differences and people fight over them. The argument's been made, if these differences don't matter, which they don't, I mean, a ton of evidence suggests the amount of money really doesn't make much difference. In Washington, D.C., they have some of the highest expenditures per pupil and some of the lowest scores in the country. In fact, a few years ago, I saw some data on different states. Of the 5 top states at that time, and it may still be true, in test scores, all were below the national average in expenditure per pupil. So it has no effect on anything except as a red herring, confusing a lot of other issues. People ask, why then do the people in the suburbs fight to prevent this from happening? Because there are advantages. I take Palo Alto High School as a classic example. Palo Alto High School has 6 tennis courts, some of which I've used, even though I never went to Palo Alto High School. They have a large parking lot, so that all the students will have a place to park their Jaguars and so on. They have a swimming pool, a baseball field, I mean, they're all the works. Now, none of that does anything for education. It's part of their lifestyle and they want to keep it, fine. But no, I think that issue ought to be off the table.
I was just curious about what you think of Nicholas Lemon's thesis in his new book, The Big Test.
I haven't read the book. What is his thesis?
He questions the new meritocracy that has emerged with the use of he would probably use the scare quotes around the term objective test of academic aptitude.
And compared to what?
Well, that's my question, really.
Well, that's the question the economists always ask. Compared to what? I mean, there's a story that an economist ran into a friend in the street, and his friend said, "How are you? How's your wife?" And he said, "Compared to what?" So, you know, nothing is easier than to prove that something human has imperfections. I'm amazed how many people devote themselves to that task. Yes, Jim Michaels. Wait, Jim, they're going to bring in the phone for you.
How is the quest for cosmic justice relate to the self-esteem thing which you referred to with Miss Simon before?
Yes, well, obviously, people, if you're going to base self-esteem on performance, it cannot be equal, because performance is never going to be equal. And so all you can get in terms of self-esteem is make-believe equality. And of course, what happens in the schools is they grade, in many cases, not on the objective result, but on how you did relative to what the teacher thinks your ability was. And so you may do a wonderful job, and they say, well, you know, he's a very bright kid, he could have done better than that, and so he gets a B. And the other student, who really did a lousy job, but you know, it was a big struggle for him even to do that, and so he gets the B+. And of course, what that means is that the whole grading system just becomes meaningless and confusing.
Professor Sowell, what you've said tonight reflects such common sense, such self-evident wisdom. Why is such a point of view largely ignored in the national press in all of the discussions on the editorial pages and among the columnists when they discuss the subject of income inequality?
I guess the quick answer is you have to ask them. I have no idea, except that, of course, the vision of cosmic justice is very beneficial to the people who hold it, even if it's not beneficial to those whom it's intended to benefit. And I think that's one of the reasons that people are so reluctant to give it up, because they feel wonderful. I'm sure that if we had had the kinds of teachers that we have today, And they had lowered the standards to all of us as we were coming through the school. And we all ended up going out into the world foredoomed to failure. Those teachers would have felt wonderful about themselves, because they say, hey, we're not leaning on these poor kids. We're taking into account that they come from backgrounds that are deprived. I mean, and particularly in education, this is devastating, because it's been shown again and again that in one generation, people can do remarkable things with a decent education. Jaime Escalante did this out in California with the Hispanic kids who scored so high on the calculus test that the Educational Testing Service could not believe it. So an awful lot can be done. Language is the same thing. The whole notion that you have to have bilingualism. Well, it's known from a lot of research that the child's brain is better able to assimilate languages in those first half dozen years than it will ever be able to do in later life, that the brain itself metamorphoses. And if you don't learn a foreign language until you're 30, you're never going to speak it as well as if you'd learned it when you were 5. And so all these things can be done, but they're not going to be done as long as third parties think that the purpose of the educational system is to make them feel good about themselves.
What do you think about school vouchers and school choice? Do you think that there's any
Well, again, it's compared to what?
in achieving traditional justice?
Well, I think they're absolutely necessary. I think that they have their dangers, but the dangers are primarily to those people who have good public schools and who would then discover with a voucher system, or who had good private schools, and who would find the government intruding more and more into private schools as people went there with vouchers, as they almost inevitably would do. The people at the bottom are so badly off that they have practically nothing to lose. One of the great disgraces of American education, far more important than the differences in spending, is the way teachers are allocated. That is, typically teachers start out in a good middle-class school, and it turns out they're awful. They'll be moved on to another school and another. And eventually, they'll start moving them down the social ladder to neighborhoods where the parents are less educated, less affluent, less influential, less able to make trouble. And so they end up teaching those kids for whom education is their only road out of poverty. Well, not only in California, but elsewhere, this constant shuffling of teachers around, which is done, by the way, simply because of the high cost of firing them. When I wrote a book on education a few years ago, I said it was $50,000 to fire one incompetent teacher. That has now been more than doubled since then. And so they move them around. And in fact, this happens so much that there are even names for this. It's called the Dance of the Lemons, or the Turkey Trot. Yes. Wait, there's a phone coming up. Microphone.
Sorry. Is the quest for cosmic justice, is it a new phenomena? Does it pertain only to education?
Oh, no.
What was its name in the past? Or was there a name in the past?
There wasn't a name for it. I guess people have simply had different notions of justice. I think sort of the codification of it was John Rawls's book, A Theory of Justice, back in 1971. But I don't think he created this. I think one of the reasons for the success of his book was that he put into words what so many people already believed, particularly in the academic world, and what many people were already practicing. So this notion has always been there, and it's been a source of great confusion, because people have said, well, there isn't real equality of opportunity if this person has this and that person has that. In the educational system, it's devastating because it takes so many forms. One of them, for example, being even when there's no income difference to talk about, there are ability differences. And the educational system, coast to coast, is bitterly set against any form of ability grouping, any form of accommodating to kids who have higher ability. In one of the studies I saw, there was a kid who was in the 4th grade, and he could score above the national average on the College Board SAT in math. And so it was suggested to the principal that this kid should be given something other than 4th grade math. And the principal reacted and he said, no, that would be a violation of social justice. Yes.
You've written in the past about if parents knew what was being taught at the college level, and if an individual like myself only has so much time, it looks to me like the more serious problem is K through 12 and college level, and so where should I devote my time?
Oh my, that is a tough one. There's more than enough that needs to be done at every single level from kindergarten to the graduate school. One of the things that protects American education is the fact that American universities are, in fact, leading universities of the world. But that's very misleading, because some of these universities are so good that it's very hard for American college students to get into them. And if you separate out the various fields and you go from the silliest and simplest, like such as education, all the way over to the other end of the spectrum, math and engineering and science, you find that the percentage of the PhDs which go to Americans are the highest over here in education, sociology, psychology, etc. And then as you proceed across the spectrum, that percentage declines until finally you get over to mathematics and engineering, where less than half of all the PhDs awarded in American universities go to Americans. And so what we really have are international universities on American soil, supported by American taxpayers, with a very large component of foreign professors and students. And this is what is used to justify the American educational system. But of course, the kids who come here from elsewhere come here with much stronger backgrounds. I was surprised recently to learn that out in Silicon Valley, they're actually recruiting engineers from Russia and India, not because they're necessarily better than American engineers, but because they speak English better. Over here, I guess. Well, someone else in the back. I'll get to you next.
Two things. First of all, Professor Sowell, how does the, assuming that parents play a major role in the education of students, how can social legislation, how can cosmic justice be created when parents do not provide atmospheres conducive to learning in certain minority communities in New York, for instance? My second question
Well, wait,
is...
are you asserting this as a fact?
Assuming that parents play a role and the teachers cannot play the only role in the education of students, how can cosmic justice be created in an atmosphere where parents have not created a conducive learning atmosphere?
I think as they say in the law, you're assuming a fact, not an evidence. I know this is one of the great beliefs in the educational establishments, that all problems in the educational establishment are caused outside the educational establishment. The evidence on that is not compelling. And what is especially not compelling is the determined effort of the NEA and other parts of the educational establishment to prevent this belief from being put to a test. If it is the case that the problems are all outside the system, they're in the parents, then why do they fight bitterly against all forms of choice and vouchers, which would allow you to find out that if we take this same kid with the same parents, watching presumably the same television programs as he always watched and so on, having the same attitudes, and transfer him over into a parochial school or some other kind of school, why don't we find out whether in fact he will not improve at all, because it was never the school's fault in the first place. The bitterness of these battles are hard to exaggerate. In California, they sent so-called truth squads around when people were trying to sign up petitions to get this issue on the ballot. And some of these people were not above using intimidation tactics to prevent people from signing. In New Jersey, one of the big companies, I think it was Pepsi-Cola, was prepared to give scholarships to low-income kids to go from the public schools into the private schools. They were so bitterly opposed to this that suddenly Pepsi-Cola machines in the schools began to be vandalized, and Pepsi had to back off its offer. So if it is in fact the case that all these problems originate outside the school system, why then are they not willing to put that belief to the test?
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes. Well, there's a gentleman here, I promised.
That's fair, yeah.
Do you think that the revival of what is deemed to be merit-based financial aid at the college level will be a force for merit in the college admissions process, or do you think the colleges will apply their cosmic justice criteria in the allocation of merit-based aid?
They may try, but I think the very fact that they've been backed into this is not something they wanted to do. In fact, it's fascinating to read in the Chronicle of Higher Education and other places all the mea culpas of college presidents who've found themselves driven to actually awarding scholarships on the basis of scholarship. No, it is absolutely a dogma of the establishment that age should not be based upon any form of production. It's the only place in the American society where there's absolutely anathema to reward people for doing better. Thank you very much.